whole session?
Yes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the December Tech Talk, the last one of this calendar year. And it's really nice to have everyone online, with Peadar sitting in the Dubai financial market at COP28 at a side event, and Shameela also sitting in the Expo Center at COP28. So it's really lovely to have everyone online. And we have Jean from IFAC that we're going to hear from a little bit later, and Deeksha sitting in Montreal, and Sandy sitting in America somewhere. Sorry, I don't know where you are. Where are you sitting at the moment?
I'm sorry, I'm in Columbus, Ohio. I'm in the Midwest.
Lovely. Thank you. And I would really like to know where you are sitting at the moment. So please use the chat function. Tell us where you are in the world and what you're doing today. If you're not at COP, perhaps you are at COP. Let us know, just to say that the reactions are open. So if you like what's happening online, if you like what the panelists are saying, please let them know by clapping your hands or all of the various emojis. If you do like it, or if you don't like it, please use the emojis. It'll be lovely. If you do have a question, I know we're going to have lots of chat today. Certainly, I've got a lot to chat about in the chat function today. So if you do have a question, we would love to take your questions. Please pop them in the Q&A, and we would that highlights the chats for us today. Well, the questions, your questions today. We've got a couple of parts today, but I'm going to, without any further ado, hand over to Peadar to launch his December Tech Talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Can you all hear me okay?
All good.
So I'm here experiencing the COP28 chaos. COP chaos, those two words seem to rhyme, and it reflects the energy, the enthusiasm when you go through the green and blue zones and so forth. Everybody really this year, it seems to me, on the same hymn sheet. We have two parts to this particular discussion today. The first part talking to experts facing, representing, as it were, giving us the voice of the corporate in the face of the tsunami of regulations now. Before we get into the detail, I'd rather now, if we could just ask Karen to share the ESG Exchange About Us page, just to remind people about our purpose and why we're here in the ESG Exchange. Karen, if we do just that. So the ESG Exchange effectively is a collaboration of all of the global standard setters and regulators and professional bodies, all of which have come together on the basis of one big and basic problem, which is there just isn't enough global expertise in the world today to help corporates do what they need to do in time to do what we need to do. So we've done two things. We have assembled a coalition of global organizations, as you see here in our famous circles of influence diagram. And in addition, we have assembled I think we're at 180 global experts now, all working across 10 practice groups at the moment, from biodiversity to tax transparency, climate, decarbonisation, and so forth. If there are experts within the group or participants here today that would like to get involved, please land on our About Us page and submit your details, your antecedents, and we'd love to hear from you. With that, I would like now quickly to jump straight into our first series of discussions. And this is the piece here now where we're talking about the voice of the corporate. We have Sandy Nessing from the C-suite in American Electric Power in the US as CSO, Vice President, overseeing a huge behemoth effort, which has to be different, Sandy, the kind of effort that was there heretofore in the CSR days. From your perspective, as we face into the tsunami of regulations, what are the challenges for corporates like yours and other corporates as well that you know?
Yeah, thank you, and good morning from the United States. I would say that one of the greatest challenges, and I think this would be for pretty much any company, is the data. Getting access to the right data. Who has the data? Is it accurate? Can you get it in a timely fashion? Is it auditable? What's it telling you? I think that's one of the big challenges from a disclosure perspective. I also think that it's really important to have support from the top of the company, from the C-suite, because that sets the tone for the rest of the organization. I did not have that when I first started at AEP, and it was very, very challenging. When I would ask for certain data points, people were very uncomfortable with that because they understood why it was important inside the business. They didn't understand why we had to put that out there on the outside of the business and why people outside cared so much about it. So part of it is getting what you need from either executive support and data collection through your subject matter experts. But the other piece of that is bringing people along so that they understand, embrace it, and support you through that journey because it truly is a journey.
And Sandy, are there any particular types of data which are more difficult to identify where the stuff is? The gathering of it, the cleansing of it, and then turning it into decision useful stuff. Any particular types of data that are more difficult than others for people to get their hands around?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think one of the most challenging for us is emissions data because we have a large fleet of power plants. And because in the United States, this type of disclosure has been voluntary up until almost this point. We're about to launch into a new regulatory regime of disclosure requirements. But up to this point, it's been voluntary. So there haven't been the kind of rigor and processes and systems in place. It's all been very manual, spreadsheet by plant, comes into a central location. Somebody's got to, understand what they're looking at, put it all together, look at the GHG protocol, do the calculations, and then tell us, what are our emissions and what kind of progress are we making. So that I think is one of the biggest challenges from a data perspective. But the other piece of that is that within corporations, every business unit is collecting data, but they're not all doing it the same way. And they're not all collecting it in a uniform way, like what the standards or frameworks are asking us for. So we've got to distill that and make sense of it and be able to present it in the way that is digestible and people can really understand what is the data telling us? What's the story that we're trying to tell? And that is also very challenging. And I'll use diversity disclosure as an example of that. We collect it from across our business units, but the HR, the human resources department, collects it in very different ways. And they slice and dice that data in very different ways. And what ended up happening is even though we're very transparent about it, we weren't putting the right metrics out there. And so last year or this year, we really changed how we showed the diversity of our workforce and how that journey is going from an attraction and retention and advancement perspective, because that's where the rubber meets the road. So you really have to dig into the data, and it's different all across the organization.
Cool. I could spend so much time talking to you about those challenges there from your perspective, looking down across such a huge organization. Deeksha, running now from the C-suite where Sandy sits, you at the coalface, what are the experiences at a practical level that you've encountered running a program office, trying to get your arms around these data?
Yeah, so most of the questions around in my conversations is where to start. How do we make this plan into action, right? Where do we get the data? What do we measure? How do we measure? How do we make sure that this is communicated well to the stakeholders? So it's all about putting things in place and, like my colleague would say, making sense of the chaos, right? So it's everything to do with, okay, we know what we need to do. How do we get there? How do we put things in place? And how do we put the measures, the controls in place that we get where we want to go? And we get there well, we get there safe, and we are not doing it for the sake of doing it, but we are actually getting things done and making a sustainable way forward for the business. And it's also
trickling the motivation from the C-suite to the shop floor, in making people, in inspiring people, in getting their buy-in, in making sure that it's not just another thing on their plate as a responsibility, but it's making them feel contributed to the cause. I think this is most important for the business in making sure that they're able to walk the talk.
Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing from a, people are talking so much now since the publication of ISO 5000, the whole question of controls and so forth, it has to be around the quality and reliability of data. It has to be the biggest single thing that has to worry organizations. So kind of a good segue to switching now into Shameela. You're Chief Executive Officer of the South African Business Initiative, and you're here just down the road, about 30 kilometers down the road at Expo, at that huge pavilion that you have there, representing the voice of all those corporate customers. In the face now of regulations, what are they saying? What are you hearing again and again as the kind of problems that they're facing?
Hi, Peter. Thank you. And I'm going to apologize in advance to the audience if it's a bit of background noise. It's very hard to find a quiet place at COP. But, suffice to say that, of course, there's a lot of excitement here and because there's just so much happening. But at the same time, I think what's become evident over the last number of days, particularly in some of the events we've been having in the pavilion, is just the challenge of being able to find the right things to do. But that's sort of, kind of parallel to the conversation we're having today. So when it comes to working with the data, it's going to be about what is the relevant data to tell the story I want to tell. And I think that the level that sits above that is the strategy that you're enabling or that you're hoping to execute on, and therefore what is relevant to that. So there's the element of what is the right conversation. So there's the strategy and governance elements around the whole, what it is you're trying to do, but then in how you're trying to communicate it. And that's where we're telling the story through the data. By and large. So for many of them, it's going to be about just what is it that I need to collect? How am I going to collect that? So you can find there's a thread through what, the previous two speakers have said already. But importantly, how does that help me tell the right story to convince my stakeholders, be they investors, be they members in society, that I'm actually taking action on the right things? And I think we've seen growing concerns over the last, bit around greenwashing. And the best way to be able to get beyond that is to really show with transparency, with clarity, and with sincerity what it is that you're doing. Data has a big role to play in that regard. But the clarity of the story, I think, is just as important. And I think those are the elements we need to put together. So whilst the data is critically important, it is really how is that enabling you to tell the right story about how you're executing on your strategy to then, kind of get around any concerns around greenwashing and corporate reputation, I think is directly aligned to that. So those are some of the trends we're seeing. The other part that I have to say is the concerns around the cost of increasing disclosure requirements. And it's the pace as well at which disclosure requirements are changing, and you are seeing this happen. And as much as we're seeing a level of convergence, for example, with the ISSB coming on board, there's still newer and newer things that are coming on that need to be considered. I mean, right now, the thing top of the agenda really is biodiversity and nature-based disclosure, for example. And whilst it took us a while to get ahead around climate, and that's one indicator, it's carbon. When we're starting to look at other information around these newer developing areas, you can see how that complexity increases, and therefore the pressure on companies, and then there's the cost implication as well, because very few are born ready with the right resources and skills in-house to be able to do this. And so you're starting to look for external support to be able to get there. The cost increases, and then so it's about how do I need to do this? Where do I need to keep it? What do I need to keep? And the complexity of the information you need to keep, and then the ability to sense make from that, I think is where we're seeing that increasing. And I can foresee that we will need to be able to give that help internally to companies to do this themselves if we want to do that, because as the just generally economies are being strained, companies are going to feel that pressure. And so whatever help we can give to bring down some of that cost by enabling people to do some of this in-house, I think is going to be a really important thing going forward.
Excellent. So that kind of segues me into, Carolyn, I'm going to ask you, so we've heard things from the corporate perspective, the collective business perspective, the program office perspective. Carolyn, I'd like to maybe share with people what they can expect to see in the how-to playbooks that we're going to begin to release. And just to let people know, in the first quarter of next year, the first playbooks will be tested with friends and family. If there are corporates present that would like to participate in that, they just need to reach out to Carolyn Chalmers, our CEO. And the initial testing phase, ladies, you can sit down around here, wherever you wish. The initial testing phase will lead into Q2, and in Q2 we will release it in a controlled way to about 50,000 users, 500 companies, leading through to calendar year end. We expect to make it available to up to 500,000 people. Our ambition is, or should I say our minimum ambition, is to make the how-to playbooks available to 10 million directors and managers from the global 10,000 between now and 2030. That minimum ambition we hope to exceed, get closer to 50 million by 2030. But in the first instance, focusing on, for example, boardroom. Do people know what questions to ask? How to interrogate the answers? The C-suite. At the very programmatic level, we find, for example, that the standards, S1, S2, FRAG, ESRS and all of that, very strong on the what, you shall do this, you shall do that. But the corporate office needs to establish a programmatic way of gathering these data at scale in a way where these data can be trusted for the purposes of disclosure and internal decision making. With that, Carolyn, you've got 3 minutes to give a taste, as it were, of what we're using, our use of AI technology to bring otherwise very dense linear documentation, make it more accessible through various tools and techniques. Carolyn.
Thank you, Peadar, and welcome to everyone again. Just to show you a brief review of how we created how we create the playbooks. First of all, the playbooks are structured. They're all structured in exactly the same way, with 5 modules that are management system modules to be able to implement something in your organization, 3 steps of change management steps, and 3 learning steps, or 3 different content arrangements. A little bit more about which we will be putting a video up, but just to say how we go about with the coalition of experts. Essentially, they identify the best available source content that they use in their day-to-day world. Then they assign the content to that structured playbook. Then we use AI to aggregate all of that content together in different formats. Then it goes back to the experts. They provide editorial input as well as additional source content if needed. Then we do a balancing, because AI has certain bias. So we do a balancing of the volume balance, because historic data has more volume. So we need to bring the thought leadership through from current thinking. We also need to make sure that different perspectives are balanced. And then finally, our experts look at the final content, which is consumable content. So essentially, you don't see the source documentation in their raw form. We've taken all the important source documentation, put it together, summarized it up, and made sure that it is accurate, it is simple, it is concise, and it is understandable. We present this in a learning management system that has been repurposed for our needs. I'm going to show you today, Peadar, the integrated thinking playbook. It's the furthest along. But just to give you a sense, so here you can see the 5 modules with the introduction. We use AI to generate the video clips from the text. So it's really text-based, which we are making consumable. We also bring in graphics, animation. Maybe just to show you quite an interesting thing in the system, we can bookmark, we can put notes, and our notes can be, this is my own personal note that I put on here. If I go to the next slide, I can show you there's some additional notes which I've made public. So here I asked the question, what about other capitals such as technology? How do we use that? And other people that are using the playbook have provided their 2 cents worth to me. So Mark considers technology as a manufactured capital, versus Gary considering it as a part manufactured and part intellectual capital. Of course, we need definitions for everything, so we make sure that our definitions are available on pop-up screens. So just to show you in terms of access, we have available all of our different notes. We have available our bookmarks, and then we're also able to highlight certain content. So essentially, we have put all of this information available, not through a search engine like Google, not through a static portal like a knowledge repository or content management system, and we've made it accessible in a just-in-time format. So in the 5 modules that enable you to then go and implement a management system in your organization. And Peadar, that's all I think we have time for today, but it will be out, as you say, for consultation in Q1 and then finally publicly in Q2 and 3.
Thanks, Carolyn. And one of the things that we, we're a charity, the ESG Exchange. We are impact driven, and uber transparency in everything we do and how we do it is something that you will shortly begin to see in terms of how we curate content and so forth. But in addition, we realize that thinking through the lens of the corporate body, having to gather these data for the first time ever, the standards and some of the guidances can be somewhat light as to how you do this stuff in practice in a corporate organization, a vast corporate organization. And so we will wiki our how-to playbooks, put them out to the world and help the world to help us to identify the best ways of gathering these data in a way which is assurable, reliable and relatable and so forth. So the wiki aspect, using a whole suite of AI-enabled technologies to do just that. Final point in that regard, it's not so much that we know how to use AI, it's that we know the problems that users in organizations have. We know what we want these AI to do for us. And we welcome the multiple thousands and hundreds of thousands that will join us in the coming year to help make these playbooks better. And at a certain point in time, they begin to stabilize. And then perhaps they might become ISO standards or guidances at some future date. So we've had the voice of the corporate customer for the ESG Exchange, and now we're joined by international, the standard setters, the regulator, and the sustainable stock exchanges, because your perspective on the whole challenge of getting ready, going from the voluntary kind of era that we lived in through to this era now of no longer being able to say, disclose what you wanted, but disclosing what you must. Now, Rodrigo, from the IOSCO perspective, what do you see as the biggest single challenges for the regulators in presenting this orchestration of global standards and regulations?
Well, thank you very much first for the ESG Exchange to invite me to participate today. Well, the biggest challenges, I would say, are around the implementation of the new standards, not only for the regulators, but I would say for everybody, the preparers, the assurers, the users, it's the whole ecosystem that is going to be, it's going to have the need to adapt to these new standards. Now, from the IOSCO perspective, from the organization that gathers the security supervisors of the world, which is the perspective that I'm here contributing today. We are, to a certain extent, a standard setter, but that's our past activity with respect to this matter. And in going forward, the main challenge is become a hub for sharing experiences, capacity building, and helping implementation in different jurisdictions. The most important step, I would say, is to take decisions at country level to adopt the standards. That is the essential element that we have ahead of us in the next months and years. And in order to do that, those countries need to be, those jurisdictions need to be ready. So there's a lot of preparatory work, but you need also to convince the decision makers to take the decisions to go ahead and adopt them. And I think it's very important that the adoption is with the least adaptations as possible. Otherwise, even if you take them verbatim as they are, that's the best solution, no question, because it's only going to increase the comparability, the efficiency of the whole system. You think of auditors or verifiers having to review reports done with different nuances. That is going to be pretty messy in terms of assuring the quality of that. And the same with stock exchanges, the same with users, fund managers. So the whole ecosystem around corporate reporting would greatly benefit from pure adoption of the standards in as many countries as possible in the next, let's say, months, years, so that we can end up in the same place and bring the consistency that the financial markets require.
So, Mardi, you're really in the fun spot in all of this, because we'll have to do in about 5 years that took about 20 odd years to do the whole financial construct. This is the non-financial space. Mm-hmm. And you're sitting in this very funny space at the actual standard setter and so forth. What do you see ahead of you in the context of the challenges for preparers and you as an organization, and particularly you in the context of the Knowledge Hub and making that available to people in a way that they can consume it and so forth?
Okay, I'm going to start by tipping this another way, because, I'm here at COB. I'm a glass half full girl. I believe in, we can do this, right? So I'm going to look at this from an opportunity perspective. What are the opportunities for those preparers that get stuck in now, right? That are the first movers and have that first mover advantage, right? So it's a real opportunity for companies to evolve their existing processes, to make them future fit regardless, make them a more resilient business. And it's also an opportunity to evolve traditional skill sets. So how do we continue to evolve the legal profession, the accounting profession, make those professions also exciting for new talent as they're coming through? People aren't choosing to go to accountancy and audit quite as much as they used to. This is a really exciting way to start bringing them in and new talent. It's also an opportunity to shift. And we've also had this the last few years we've really been hearing about everyone's got a sustainability strategy. We don't need sustainability strategy. We need sustainable business strategies, right? So it's an opportunity to continue to evolve this, to have sustainable businesses. And it also, for those that come out first, the real opportunity is identifying those risks and thinking about early mitigation and potential cost savings that might come from that. And we all know those that came out early on disclosure and start thinking about their supply chains and what they really look like. A few adjustments can save quite a lot of money, as well as have a very different environmental impact and set you up to be resilient, and be still creating value in the very long run. And also lowers your cost of capital. Another really important reason to get started. But also for those in developing and emerging economies, moving early with our standards allows your accounts to be compared with others around the world and attract that capital that we hear here at COP is absolutely needed to finance the future transition. So from an opportunity perspective, I think there's loads of opportunities why we need governments to adopt these outright, without the deviations that Rodrigo mentioned, but also build right in now, getting started and getting ahead. Because if you're ahead of the regulation, you're even better prepared for the future challenges ahead, but better prepared as a business. So the Knowledge Hub, thank you for asking. I always worry I'm going to get branded the Knowledge Hub lady. I set up the TCFD Knowledge Hub many years ago, and now I've just built the ISSB Knowledge Hub. And there's a difference. I think I learned from setting up the TCFD Knowledge Hub. As we were building this one, I won't say it was a huge signposted exercise, but we tried. We put something on the IFRS website and sent a bit of a news shot out to say, we're going to build a Knowledge Hub to help with adoption of the standards. What would you find useful? And we got nearly 500 responses back. And we matrixed those out, and then we thought, right, what resources do we know exist? What resources do we need to build now, right away? And what do we need to build in the future pipeline? And also, what partners could help us build them? Who's experts? Because IFRS Foundation typically sets standards. We don't typically go and produce loads and loads of guidance and support the market to bring it in. And so who can we work with to help fill those gaps, if you like, to develop those high quality resources to help us? And so, and where we can signpost to the other resources that we're developing along the way, such as the stock exchange training with Tiffany and the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, or with IOSCO and the work we're going to be doing for regulators this year. So how do we get that all into one place and know that it completely aligns with the standards? So if someone does it, they're not going to do it and then find out later on it's not quite right. So we've put it on there. The board have reviewed every resource that's on there to make sure it's absolutely 100% aligned. So it's a really good place for people to go to get started. And obviously that will continue to evolve as we continue to get more questions that come in and more needs, and we'll continue to build that out over time.
I like your references there around to capital, because it occurs to me that when consumers buy bottles of water or whatever, we look for the calorie intake and all that. It's only a matter of time we're going to see the emissions associated with this. We're going to see a thumbs up or a thumbs down with regards to social factors, own workforce, workers in the supply chain, and so forth. So it's really going to influence the buying decision of a person on the street. And that's going to influence, the providers of capital, right? So you're right, it is about this business, the business opportunity, and so forth. Tiffany, from your perspective, you're looking at 64,000 odd companies associated with the sustainable stock exchanges. You must see huge contrasts in terms of the challenges across those multiple markets, across those tens of thousands of organizations. So when you're looking at the patchwork quilt of challenges, what do you see surfacing to the top that needs to get addressed?
Well, it's not me looking at the companies. It's actually the stock exchanges. Okay. So I think what's important to note here is the reason we've managed to interact so much with the companies is the stock exchanges. We're at the Dubai financial market now. I saw Shameela on the line, who used to work with us directly through the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So she clearly knows well what the role is of a stock exchange. But a stock exchange sits in the center of a market where it's really their job to understand what's happening locally and what's happening globally, and how are they going to connect those two lines. It's a huge challenge for them, but it got made a lot easier by ISSB, because now we can start to guide them on a consistent global standard, a consistent language that's being used everywhere that they can then pull into their market. So what we do is we provide the stock exchanges with a very clear overview of what's happening globally, and then we work with them about what's happening locally and how they can make that connection. And we work with them either directly or through peer learning, so they can come together and see what different stock exchanges are doing. We just came from a panel where we had Dubai Financial Markets and the London Stock Exchange Group sitting next to each other, sharing their different challenges and opportunities that they're seeing. We also do that through advisory groups working together. But I think that's really where we're seeing that interesting thing that Marty's saying. We don't want a sustainability strategy. We want a sustainable business strategy. If we weren't talking about real markets here, if we weren't talking about real finance, we wouldn't have the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, NYSE, all these top clear markets that are real financial markets leading this and really pushing for it. And we wouldn't have IOSCO at the table pushing for adoption and working so hard if we weren't talking about real financial markets and financial impact here. So I think that's really where the voice of a stock exchange working together with their regulators is maybe seeing those challenges, but being able to push past them and show the opportunity and building capacity that aligns global to local.
Super. Yeah, from the IFAC perspective, the professional bodies, as they get organized and ready to provide limited assurance, reasonable assurance, and so forth, the accounting profession, what do you see as the challenges? I don't know whether I should be looking at the camera now or my colleagues here, but the challenges facing the profession in particular as you look forward to the next 5 years and so forth. What's your perspective, Jan?
Yeah, thank you very much. And coming from Paris, very pleased to join this very interesting call, because this has already been said about the challenges, and I will not repeat all of them, starting from the users, the observers, and so on. As IFAC, which is the convening association for all the accountants in the world, I think we have also a lot to do, and this has already mentioned on many aspects. But first, we at IFAC, we are both practitioners in firms which deliver assurance, but we also have within our organization those practitioners who are working in companies, in corporations, and who are CPAs, who are still engaged, who are engaged in their in our member organizations, in our members, and so we have two populations, one of which is already really impacted by what has already been said, especially at the beginning by the ones representing companies, corporations, and then we have those ones who are going to address the question of giving some level of assurance on what is going to be produced. Now, if I try to summarize first, and it has been mentioned from the beginning of this call, first it starts with companies. So it's about data, it's about systems, and therefore the ones from our profession who are in those corporations, they have to learn to be part of it and to do their way. And from the and this is very, of course, very important for all of us for the future, because if we have not the right data, we will not have at the end the right way to monitor this whole very important information. Now, there's a second question, which is about the comparability of the data throughout the world. And at IFAC, we push hard for the ISSB to work, to be engaged into this and to work, because our what we are afraid of is of a risk of fragmentation, and for the time being, we cannot make for sure that there will not be such fragmentation if we don't have, and you already, as IOSCO representative, you mentioned that what is very important is to have the local jurisdictions adopt the right standards and make sure that we don't have too many standards which are not unified, which don't speak the same way. So this is a very key challenge for the next, well, it is already a key challenge, but it is a key challenge, as you mentioned, for the next few months and maybe years. So this is something we are observing and trying to, in our role, trying also to put our voice on this. This is a big challenge. And then we come to the third challenge, which is the challenge of what level of assurance will be given on this information once it is prepared in the proper way, and once it is used by a board of directors, by audit committees, by strategy, and so on and so on. What level of assurance will be given on that? And this is something we also are very sensitive to. Fortunately, and we are very we think it is something very important in this matter. The IASB, so the standard setter on audit standards, has already engaged into a very important work with which will lead to a standard which will be called ISA 5000. And ISA 5000, the draft has already been submitted for comment. The comment stopped last Friday. I understand from the information I got that there were many letters which have been sent, mails to comment upon this draft standard. And I heard the chair of the IAASB recently saying in our council that the objective for the standard setter is to have something ready in the second semester before the end of 2024, which is very soon and very important for all of us. And finally, another challenge, not finally, sorry, I have also in the same area, we have the International Ethics Standard Board for Accountants, which is already also working on having having a set of standards which will be potentially used by all of us working on this level of assurance which will be given, meaning that it will not only be available for the accounting profession, but for the first time it will be also available for non-professional, agnostic accounting professionals, which will also probably be engaged in this journey. So this is also a very important piece of work. And finally, and this is our own challenge, is like what has been said by the previous presenters, that what is important is to have to make sure that our profession, our professionals are ready, which implies to have the right education, to have the right it's a lot of work to make sure that we engage in the proper way. It doesn't mean that everyone will be at the same level, but we should make sure that everyone who will be engaged in giving assurance on sustainability information will have the appropriate level to be able to be as professional as should be. So in a nutshell, and sorry if I have been a bit too long, these are my comments as IFAC Vice President on this very, very, very important topic, but also, and this has been mentioned a few minutes ago, but also a journey which is also very, which brings enthusiasm to many young generations who were wondering from time to time if we are right at the level of public interest role, which is our role. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. I've got one more question to ask on kind of a very fast whip around, because I'd like very much to get at least one or two questions from participants into our group here. Rodrigo good segue prompt here from Carolyn. We would like our participants here to very quickly take a look at this poll here and give us the benefit of your view as to the problems that you see facing climate disclosure. I'm just going to allow people just seconds to complete this poll. I'm sure we'll be interested in the results. I'm sure we won't be surprised with the results, but nevertheless, it's always interesting to run these. And for the polls that we've run on the Tech Talks since we commenced last July, we'll be doing a short report. We'll release it in the first quarter of next year. For example, the whole materiality discussion, impacts discussion, and so forth, and this discussion. And we'll see if we can make sense and join the dots based on those polls. Carolyn, anything of interest that you want to share with us there in terms of the results of that poll? Yeah, no super surprises there, it seems. Limited guidance. And again, and hopefully in the ESG Exchange How-To playbooks, I've spoken to directors and those indeed on audit subcommittees, not too sure that they know what questions they need to ask, right? Other than very general questions, not so sure they know how to interrogate the answers, and so forth from a practical perspective up from management. Carolyn, thanks for that. Rodrigo, question for you. In terms of this kind of very complex ecosystem that you're living in, that's part of your world, the different types of supports that are required for them looking forward, what are the challenges with regards to providing those supports? What are the supports that are required?
Well, I think the main support, according to the question, the absence of data is clearly an issue. I think the implementation of the standards itself will help on the availability of the data for many others, even companies that are not initially subject to the standards. But in terms of support, I think capacity building is number one. So guidance and capacity building, I would say. Guidance in terms of understanding how the standards can be implemented in a manner that is compliant with the standards themselves. And of course, the ISSB there has to lead the way. And in terms of capacity building, allowing and empowering all those different professions and collectives that, it's literally hundreds of thousands of people around the world involved in this. Now, that is going to be a joint effort. Of course, IOSCO is going to contribute to that. ISSB has a very, as Mardi was saying, intense capacity building program, and many other organizations, UNSSE and the like. But maybe let me go back and stress something related to this challenge, which is how important it is that when jurisdictions implement those standards, that they decide the who and the when, but they don't decide the what, meaning it's completely understandable that some jurisdictions will apply those standards to a subset of listed companies. And that subset will depend on the size of the market, the level of sophistication, or the size. And that has been the case in most markets. They are discussing about how many companies will be subject to these standards. So that's the who. The one will be since which reporting year, 2024, 25, 26. We know the several countries going ahead in 2024 accounts, let's say, with compulsory reporting. But it's very important that the what is the common standard. Because imagine what would happen with capacity building if somebody invented scope 2.5, or if somebody decided to develop the concept of adjusted materiality. Then all those professions, all those colleagues that are listening to us, they would start panicking naturally, because then you break the consistency. So who's going to be subject? That's a decision to be taken by countries and by governments and by regulators. When this hits, that's also a very important decision, and there can be combinations of those. There can be graduality on that, but let's ensure that the final point is the same one.
Cool. Yeah, it doesn't feel like Mission Impossible almost, really. The pace of change, the pressures on the knowledge hub, the pressures on getting information out, taking on the emphasis you placed there on capacity building. What do you see as the supports required around capacity building? And from your perspective, what's rising to the surface from your perspective as being the number one or two big asks?
I think we've been very lucky, because last year at COP we launched the partnership program for capacity building, and we said we can't do this on our own. We need to go out there and surround ourselves with the best available friends and partners out there that can help us meet the challenge ahead, and help us with their own unique jurisdiction or unique skill set or unique audience that they bring to the table, and work with them to problem solve, work with them to think about what's going to help move and drive high quality adoption and voluntary bottom up, because although we have to get the regulators in, it could take a bit longer in some places. So how do we support the bottom up preparers to build those market enabling conditions in the absence of mandatory? And we sort of know, actually, don't we, Tiffany, from years of doing this together, that when you have sort of voluntary requirements on exchanges and you start to do capacity building, it's about 3 years till we start to move into mandatory reporting of climate information and sustainability information. There's a bit of leeway there, but there's a sort of a vague correlation along there. And so, it's looking for these sort of synergies that we can find around the world. And how do we work to move those so that we're moving everyone incrementally forward at once to our global baseline? And so that's why, we've had a very successful first year, and we're scaling up and resourcing and fundraising as well, and more partners coming in across the world as we've got key jurisdictions, that are starting to sort of bubble up, that saying, well, we're moving forward, but we don't know what to do. Okay, we're here to help. And then we can go, right, we've got 8 countries. So Brazil has committed all in. G20 next year, this year, next year, got the presidency, I think, already, or almost about to take it. How are we going to support Brazil in achieving their mission, right? How are we going to support Nigeria, who came out last year at COP, or Turkey, who's just announced this afternoon while we've been on here that they're moving to adoption? So then when we go into that jurisdiction, we look for the partners, we look for our global partners, we look at the needs assessment. They're already doing mandatory TCFD. Well, they've got pretty much most of that market's got S2 underway. What do we need to do to get them ready for the following year for S1, for example, if that's where they're going? So we're very much sort of matrixed, map out, if you like, the world, and the Knowledge Hub is really just where all these great things go. We're building out e-learning in Q1, and there'll be some key modules there. One explicitly for accountants is the 4th module that'll be slightly later this year, but IFAC's been advising us on that already and working with them. And that's also partly in response to the challenge we heard out of Africa in the African Congress of Accountants last year. It was, goodness, we need something. And we looked at what the offering was, and we were like, oh, goodness. Right, okay, let's build something together with IFAC that aligns up to their education standards that other people can cut and paste to or point to, that's CPD accredited, and will make people, I like to say this, you won't be an expert, but you'll be dangerous and you'll know how to get started and be ready to look, ready to go on and think what next it means for you.
Cool. I guess the great thing for corporates listening in on this conversation here is that they can see that effectively the world is in a state of flux. And we're having to, we're going through this rite of passage, right? And so we're all in this together in many respects. Tiffany, pretty much the same question for you in terms of capacity building. What's it look like through your lens?
Well, luckily for me, it's mostly on Mardi's desk. Sorry, Mardi. But so Mardi and I worked closely together on the TCFD training, and this shift that we went from training on the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which was a framework, to now moving into ISSB, which is a standard, was actually a bigger shift than I was expecting. So with TCFD training, we basically took that on. We worked together with CDSB and CDP, who were handling the Knowledge Hub. We made sure that we had very consistent materials that was being used in other training, but we shifted a lot of it. We tried to make it really accessible. And the number one question I often got on training was, I did another TCFD training where someone told me to do XYZ. And my response was often, well, on page X of the TCFD recommendations, it says, contrarily, you should do this. And we were always trying to kind of correct what other people were training in different areas. We weren't a standard, so we couldn't say you have to do it this way, but we recommended following the framework as closely as you could and what they said. Now with ISSB, we've hit a new level, right? So we slowed down a bit in the production of our training, but we were much more rigorous in it. And we made sure we're working very closely with Mardi's team. I mean, we speak at least weekly with your team. We know them very well now. We love working with you guys, but it's hit a different level. And I've learned that process, the importance of that. It's not just us that has to do that though. So we've gone through this process of making sure that the training that we're going to give is directly linked to the standards.
And signed off by the board.
And signed off by the board as well. And I think it's really important what the big challenge that Mardi has now is making sure that they can kind of keep an oversight of all the other capacity building, because what we're doing is just a drop, right? We're trying to reach as many people as we can to give them the knowledge they need to start jumping into this pool that's much bigger than what we're offering. But it's not just us, it needs to be accountants, it needs to be regulators, it needs to be business schools who are teaching the future generations about accounting and strategy and business development. It's so much more in this ecosystem, but it's really important that everybody's trying to attach it back to the standards and make sure that what we're teaching people isn't taking them down the wrong road or confusing them or bringing them backwards a step or two. I think we took this huge, ginormous step forward with the standards. And if we don't stick to those standards, we're taking a step back again.
Mardi, I just can't help but feeling, no pressure.
I do feel pressure, but I mean, Tiffany is not giving herself enough praise here, because she managed to train over 25,000 preparers on her last course. And obviously I'm going to set a target higher than that this time round
all right.
for us to try and achieve. But that's an awful lot of people, Tiffany, that go through your training course and your academy, if you like. And it's a really powerful way of making sure markets have the right knowledge, not just on ISSB standards, but on carbon markets, on transition, on gender. You do a lot of really interesting work there that others on this call today might be interested in looking at as well.
Cool. John, the last question to you, the last words pretty much in the context of the profession, supports, capacity building, and so forth. What do you see through your lens?
First, I want to repeat that the awareness has been settled already for 3, 4, 5 years ago. So progressively, this has been the main topic in our meetings, in our communication. And we also made a lot of observations for the benefit of everyone with the what we call the state of play, which showed that we had already different levels of involvement for sustainability reporting depending on the local requirements. So this is already there. But now, as you all said, it's about being ready, making sure that we are ready first to understand the standards on reporting, on sustainability reporting, and second, for those who will provide assurance to be ready for providing this level of assurance. And on the first point, may I repeat that our concern is still to have a level of sustainability reporting standards which is implemented throughout the world with something which is coherent, which is not fragmented. And we are not yet there, so let's push hard. And second, on the level of assurance, this is important too, because the outcome of all this, what we are talking about today, will not be good if we don't have some level of assurance which is provided. Otherwise, we will go back to greenwashing. So yes, being ready for those is key, and this is why we talk about education. We talk about also being able to involve in our teams experts. How do we work with experts? Because we know that CPAs will not be will not have all the expertise on some difficult items. So this is this whole journey, which is now very which is engaged by every PAO, every member of the organization about any CPA. I think people are now, the first problem, and it was that in my country 2 years ago, the first problem was to make people are convinced that we have to move forward. Today, I think this is starting to be behind us, and now the problem is, how do we do? So that will be my last comment.
Thank you, Jan. We're at the end of our discussion. Just two more things to do before we close. First is Carolyn, our second poll question. Can you put that up for us, please? Here we go. I need support with regards to the following choices. You've got maybe 5 seconds, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. Give us a sense of what's bubbling to the surface here. Taking your closing bids now. Carolyn will close in a few seconds. I've got I'm going to give it 30 seconds. We've got 3 minutes to go. It's an important sensor. The results, Carolyn? Okay. I turn up the top, resources, how to find the right data, missing data, how to set targets and track progress. Anybody like to grab any one of those just before we close?
Well, I was hoping how to establish the tone from the top was going to get more resources or more votes, because that's so essential. Yeah. And I think if we don't start there, hopefully that means they've already started. They've already got the tone from the top, and now they're trying to move forward on the journey, which is good news, I think.
I guess it's nothing like regulations to instill fear.
That's right. Regulation goes a long way to
that gets attention.
Supporting resources.
Yes, it's a very effective tool. It gets attention, and I see lots of thumbs up there and so forth from people. Would like to thank you all for joining us on our series of ESG Tech Talks. We commence next year, second Thursday of every month, again, the second Thursday of January. We're going to see a slight change in emphasis now more into the how-to. We're going to give you visibility, how we're building these how-to playbooks, invite you to give us feedback, your contributions. We'll be very much focused on pain relief for board, for management, and for those at the coal face and pulling together these data and so forth. I would say to you, whatever you do, be careful out there. If in doubt, do the right thing. Think about the standards, your disclosure obligations. That's pretty close to the right thing. And if in doubt, do it the right way. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.